Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to the BlockCrunch podcast, the go-to podcast for investors and builders in crypto.
This episode of the BlockCrunch podcast is brought to you by CoinFlex and PARASWAP. Stick around to learn more. And hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the BlockCrunch podcast. Now today I'm really excited to have on our show one of the most interesting characters in all of crypto, in my opinion. He is an on-chain detective who has built a large following by exposing over 40 scammers using on-chain data and sophisticated analysis. And he has uncovered scams worth millions and millions of dollars, including most recently the Wonderland situation, which for even the non-crypto natives among you, you might have seen on Bloomberg, where one of the core anonymous contributors is allegedly involved in one of the industry's biggest exit scams, the Quadriga Canadian exchange. So by publicly calling out a lot of these alleged scammers, Zach is also likely giving himself a bit of a target behind his back. So because of that, he's going to stay anonymous, and we're also going to modularize his voice in his interview. But I'm really grateful that Zach has decided to come on BlockCrunch as his first podcast appearance. So welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate the hefty intro as well. Had a lot to stand for there.
Definitely. Now, I know you're anonymous, so I don't want to, put you on the spot and make you introduce yourself. But to the extent that you're comfortable, can you maybe share with us a little about, how you started doing this on-chain sleuthing?
Yeah. So I joined the cycle. Crypto last cycle was pretty new then. Fell for a lot of the initial ICO type BS. Kind of following what people said. I think that's just a trap everyone really falls for, just because of the fact that there's so much to learn when you join the crypto space. So you kind of look for that guidance, even though it's not the best thing to do. So it's just kind of there's all those overpromised ICOs, like the Vitalik, get fit. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah.
Just some of those are kind of comedic ones, I guess you could say. But yeah, I fell for some of those, bag held through the rest of the bull run, and then you think it's gonna keep going, and then the music stops. I think a lot of people got wrecked that cycle. Kind of went a little more inactive, at least 2018, 2019 kind of kept back some, and never was really involved with Twitter until this past year, just because of the fact there's a lot of noise there, and I'm more active on Discord with people I want to talk to, but there's a lot of drama and stuff I've kind of wanted to stay out of in the past.
That makes a lot of sense. And now in the past few years since you first came into the space, you've uncovered a lot of really interesting situations. Some are outright scams, some are kind of questionable behavior from maybe developers or investors. What was the largest, or I guess most memorable thing that you have uncovered so far?
So I guess it really depends. I guess everyone's going to say the Wonderland stuff, but I wouldn't really say that as much as I guess it was probably my second one I did. It was for MoonRock. I guess that's most memorable because just at least with crypto Twitter, there's so many influencers that do promotions undisclosed for IDO allocations and stuff like that. So when I say that, they were kind of the VC that led a lot of these deals for just some of these projects with not the best tokenomics, and they didn't really have the best intentions in mind. And then kind of with that thread, I really did observe some of the projects they incubated, and just kind of pointed out all the insiders that were selling right at launch, and then as a direct result of that, just how the charges completely dropped off after.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like for the things you expose, it involves things like the MoonRock case, which you mentioned, and also things that are involved alleged actual scammers. So how would you categorize the different types of people that you expose, and how do you kind of decide what type of projects or people to go after?
Yeah, so I guess at least on my website, I categorize it into 3 different types. You of course have the projects, then you have I guess the influencers or people, and then of course the VCs. I guess it's kind of the broad way to narrow it down, but I guess some of them kind of overlap as well. So there's no one size fits all.
Got it. And I think a few people are also interested on Twitter when it comes to your process, right? So we're going to dive into maybe specific examples later, but when you decide to build a case, right, how does it usually begin? Do you get anonymous tips from people or maybe whistleblowers from certain projects? And how long does it take for you to build out that entire case?
So I'd say in the past, at least when I started, it was mostly just my own research. And with that, I'd say like a lot of people, you'd be surprised with like how much they actually leave out there and don't really cover their tracks much. After you've like been in space for like a more than a cycle, you have a pretty decent idea of like who does what and like what are some of the good people you should like associate with and some you could maybe have some more caution to. And like with that, like there's like you see them like tweeting out blah blah about blah blah blah, and you're like, there's no way they're just tweeting out about this. So kind of with that, my process goes. I recognize some of these individuals, and with that, it's really the same process. Like you literally kind of go to Twitter search, or you can like kind of use like their API features as well, and then you can kind of like use the keywords to just like IEO, Launchpad, launch some stuff like that, and you'd be surprised with the amount of tweets it brings up. Or sometimes I'll go to like crypto deleted. It's a Telegram that's kept up, and it's like basically it has all the deleted tweets of like a bunch of different influencers, and kind of you're able to search some there as well. It doesn't have like this works more for like some of the accounts with higher followers, but with some of the lower ones, it just really doesn't. But kind of with that as well, if they delete tweets, however, that's a case, I really have to then go to the archive.org. It's a great tool, probably one of my favorites. Kind of goes back with pretty much every case because if anyone deletes their tweets, you can go back, search the and it will bring up a bunch of tweets you've saved and any that are like archived by people. Great resource. I can't thank it enough. And then also as well, people using public addresses. Like I said at the start, people do not cover their tracks well. So they'll literally do it from their public address and like there's no shame at all. And then kind of from a project standpoint, it kind of goes back to like looking at the launches and stuff like that. You'd be surprised like what you can like see from that. And then like as well as like some that come out from maybe like the private sale contract, you can see some of the distributions there and what happened with those. That's worked as well for some, but it really kind of varies for each one. But I would say at the end of it, it comes down to I end up having to use archive.org for stuff and also having to use check the chain.
That's really interesting. And I guess in general, right, for these cases that you build, what do you have in mind in terms of the intended outcome? Is it for maybe investors to know what projects to avoid, or maybe for some sort of legal action to be taken upon some of the scammers?
So I guess like in the best interest, in an ideal world, self-policing works. Like everyone wants it to work. It's the ideal situation. No one wants to like have interference with the government or anything like that around the world. But I mean, it's kind of inevitable at this point, just because of the fact we've kind of seen that people pick and choose on like when self-policing works. So kind of with that, I'm just like, it's a good question. So yeah, I think that's pretty much where I want to leave it at. Is I want to say self-policing works, and I don't really want to have like I don't want like everyone else. I do not want a bunch of government officials coming in and like raiding people. But at the same time, like some people need to be accountable because there's a bunch of people getting wrecked.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess that relates to my next question is, has there ever been a case where maybe a bad actor that you helped uncover got into maybe legal trouble, or maybe has authorities like reached out to you for help? Because I mean, when I'm assuming when authorities investigate some of these things, it's still very new for them, right? Not all of them know how to parse things on chain or do the type of I guess reverse engineering for OPSEC that you're able to do. So do they ever kind of reach out to you and ask, hey, can you help us out in uncovering like different scammers?
So I think that's maybe something we'll see later down the line. Like we see right now, they're still going after some of the ICO scams from 2017, 2018. They're not really the most time efficient, but I could see that happening later down the road just because of the fact some of the governments right now, I think we saw in Dubai and maybe UK as well, I think, and Spain too. For both of those, at least, they said they were going to start like cracking down on like some of the influencers, kind of that don't have the best intentions and use misleading verbiage. but we've kind of there hasn't been like anything in the news really, so I don't really know if it's just all talk and no action. And like at least in the U.S., they like to make an example of people and aren't really as consistent. So it'll also be interesting to see like if they actually like start cracking down on it more from like a wider level.
Yeah, and speaking of these influencers, obviously a lot of them have massive followings, like retail followings. And they really rely on their reputation to potentially maybe dump their holdings onto their followers, or at least allegedly. So I'm curious, like, did any one of them, try to bribe you or threaten you when you wanted to uncover them? Because I'm assuming it's very disruptive to their whole grift.
Yes, you can definitely say that. So I think it really depends. I think it definitely has hurt some of the deal flows, and same with some of like the cash grab VCs. I've had like some of them. I guess like I saw your tweet thread. I think it was yesterday, or the day before, where you kind of just like were saying like some of the complaints about the industry and like different like topics and like the ones that aren't real VCs, and they kind of just spray and pray. I think it has hurt some of the deal flow. I've had a few of them reach out where like, hey, can you take this down? And same with some of the influencers. Hey, can you take this down? I've been threatened before. Like, actually, that's like pretty common, I'd say. I wouldn't say it's like it's only been like one or two influencers that actually threatened me, but like they never actually followed through, or like after a thread, like I'll post it and get a bunch of traction, and then shortly after, a fresh account threatens me with blah blah blah, and I'm like, this probably is most likely them because the timing is too coincidental.
Yeah, and I'd love to dive into the MoonRock example, which you brought up earlier, because it is probably indicative of a lot of similar other types of situations as well. So for those who are not familiar, can you kind of recap what exactly happened with MoonRock, and how did you kind of stumble upon that?
Yeah, so they were like a VC firm that I believe was, I'm trying to it's recall now, it's been a little bit, but at the end, I want to say like 2019, 2020 was kind of when they started like really starting to get deal flow from like some of like the lesser known projects, I guess you could say, that most quality VCs don't really touch. But kind of with that, they had some that kind of say Kickstarter was really Polka Starter. It's like the first like IDO launchpad, and kind of the model is really like messed up because from these launchpads, typically a percent of the sale or a percent of the actual like supply goes back to the launchpad, and then also some of them charge fees, and also sometimes the actual like owners of the launchpad get to invest in the private sale of the IDO. So it's kind of like a whole like Ponzi model, at least, because then they like also create their own tokens. So there's like all these benefits going back to like the people that like create these launch pads. So it's like the perfect grift, just because like how much benefits they actually get, and like how like risk free it is, just because of like the amount of projects launching with VC backed money, but they're not really VCs. And then kind of with that, they've sprayed and prayed a bunch with like a bunch of different projects, and all the ones they incubated have like the same model. Like you see in these, the vesting schedule is just completely messed up. Like on TGE or token generation event, is like when it launches. They typically get like 10 to 20% of their allocation on that date, and then they get like their whole allocation like vests within a couple months. Versus with quality projects, it's more spread out, and like there's actually VCs are incentivized to actually help out these projects long term. You don't really like see that with a lot of these projects. A lot of these newer VCs pop up as. But essentially, like MoonRock, I guess you could say, was one of the more successful spray and pray VCs at the time. And after my thread, it seemed like they went dark on Twitter for at least a couple months. And it's hard to track for a lot of these cash grab VCs to really see if they actually like aren't getting deal flow, just because like the projects they interact with are not really like the most known. So sometimes like I'm sure they were still investing in, but maybe it just wasn't publicly known. And at the same time, there's not really like a good like source that tracks like every VC and what deal they invest in. There is one source, I'm trying to think of the name. There's Cypher Hunter is a good one, and I posted another one on Twitter the other week, but I'd have to go back. Do you happen to know, Jason?
I don't think I know, but I'll definitely look it up and pop it in the show notes after if
Yeah.
I find out.
Awesome. So yeah, kind of with that, it just kind of goes back to the spray and pray model of they're, I guess, like one of the more successful ones at it. And even to this day, like same projects all have that cash grab like aspect of the tokenomics, just completely screw retail, and the VCs can like start dumping almost instantly.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that the cases you cover are so diverse, right? You have situations like the MoonRock case where they allegedly create these projects and these kind of somewhat opportunistic token economic design. And then you also have projects that are not probably not scams, but might strike some as opportunistic. I remember you wrote this thread on WorldCoin, which was a Silicon Valley darling. Can you maybe summarize that situation a bit before we dive into that?
Yeah, so kind of the WorldCoin, that was an interesting one. It was actually led by many like popular Web 2 VCs, I guess you could say, particularly A16Z, and I'm trying to think some of the other ones, 3AC, but I thought A16Z was the one that led the round for it, and they raised like I think a couple. I want to say it was like it was a pretty high valuation, but the whole like project itself was pretty messed up in itself. So essentially, you would what their like model was is they wanted to give everyone in the world like an airdrop essentially. And how would they do this? They wanted to scan your eyeballs, and kind of with that, they had like this orb, and it would like scan your iris. And then after that, it would like verify you haven't like received the airdrop, and then they would airdrop you a couple tokens. And it was kind of messed up just because the fact I think it was 15 to 20% the supply went to the founders, and then the rest went back to went to everyone else, I guess, in the world that scans their eyeballs. But it was just messed up because, like, I think there was some verbiage in like the way they could actually use your data, like what you were actually agreeing to when you scanned your eyeball. So it was like kind of messed up on there, and it was very like you down the path, like people are like scared that tech's going to go down, and they got a bunch of pushback, and they've actually like kind of disappeared on Twitter. But recently, I actually received a DM, and they're it's kind of I'm not don't agree with this, but they're kind of pushing it out in countries that aren't really like educated on like how these companies kind of use their data and stuff like that. They're pushing it out in some like the more less developed areas where people don't really have that financial literacy and kind of understand what's actually being how they're being taken advantage of.
That's so. I think that's such an interesting case because I ideologically, when I first saw the project, I wasn't very aligned with it. I felt that there's some elements of digital colonialism that I wasn't very okay with, but at the same time, I wouldn't call it a scam. But at the same time, the projects that you cover, range from opportunistic token designs and I guess cash grab VCs to these, I guess, somewhat controversial ideas, and then to actual scammers or former scammers. So how do you kind of set the bar in terms of, okay, these are the people I'm going to go after, and how do you decide who deserves to be, I guess, covered?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess some of it's just judgment, and then it really depends on like some level of the DMs I get from people as well. Like, so a lot of times, a lot of my DMs are just like they're not really like substantiative. Like they're very like just hi, how are you, or like they say go after this person. They don't actually like give me any kind of leads there. But if the lead's strong enough, I'll actually like pursue it in that way. And likewise with like some of the research I do as well. There's some topics I want to look at, and it's just like very clear cut. I kind of try and avoid when it's a more of a gray area, just because of the fact that really, I think that's a part where a lot of the past people have tried to like, I guess, do what I do with, they've went wrong at least, because then you start to get a lot of pushback after, and I think another part of the strategy is you don't want to go for like the like top people at first because otherwise people are just going to think you're like crazy pretty much. So I think that was part of the thing as well. I want to like establish my credibility over time, and then maybe try and research some of like the, I guess, not cases that aren't as clear cut.
And of these 40 plus cases that you've exposed so far, and some of them are pretty, well followed influencers, maybe on YouTube, maybe in NFT circles, what has the impact been on them mostly? Do they kind of immediately lose their following, or do their investors come to their defense or lash out at you? And what has been the common response usually?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say it really varies. It really depends on how disliked that person is by the community already, which is interesting. If they're in the kind of the CT circle, I guess you could say, or crypto Twitter, for those of you that don't know, the pushback is kind of very minimal. Like maybe they just ignore it and it goes away. But if that person is generally disliked, then typically they try. People on Twitter will kind of make it more of a thing and give more pushback to that person, and kind of become outcasts. It really depends. I think the best example is kind of with the crypto god John. He's like an influencer and he has a large paid group as well. And I essentially just uncovered from his public address, he was dumping right after he tweeted a lot of his low cap coins he would tweet out, and then there's some kind of sketchy activities at the time going on inside their paid group as well. Like they would do signals for certain tokens, and there'd be like low caps, and it'd be like a scalp, and then they had like 6,000 plus people buying it, and it would already like dump. It kind of was reminiscent of those. I don't know if you remember, but back in 2018, they had like those pump and dump telegrams where it'd be like, get ready for the biggest pump ever. And it's like some obscure coin you've never heard of. But it was kind of like reminiscent of that, but like in a paid group.
Before I continue, I'd love to share more about our latest sponsor, CoinFlex. Now, CoinFlex is an exchange that's been around for a while. They're actually doing $1.5 billion in daily trading volume right now. And recently, their team reached out and walked me through their latest product, the AMM Plus. In short, it lets anybody earn fees as market makers on the CoinFlex exchange simply by depositing their assets. As of this recording, the 7-day in-range average for ETH AMM pool depositors is 82%. So how does this work? If you're familiar with how other AMMs out there work, this is very similar. You can basically select what price range to provide liquidity for, and the UI even shows you your risk under different scenarios. I also love that they have this cross-collateral system, so you can market make in any market you want, using pretty much any collateral you have. If you know how to manage your risks, you can even access up to 10x leverage while providing liquidity. So this is one of the most creative ways I've seen a company borrow elements from DeFi in a centralized exchange setting, so I highly encourage you to check it out at coinflex.com/AMM. I'd love to share one of my favorite products in crypto with you. Now, whenever I want to trade a token, instead of going to Uniswap, SushiSwap, Bancor one by one to see where I can find the best quote, I just go to PARASWAP to scan for the best price anywhere. Because PARASWAP aggregates all the popular Ethereum dexes and saves me a ton of time and headache in finding where I can trade something for the best price, and lets me trade in one place. Now, the cool thing is they've also integrated with Ledger Live as well, meaning I can now swap at the best prices directly from my Ledger wallet. So seriously, if you're a DeFi trader and you're worried about the security risks of centralized exchanges, but you also don't want to scour dozens of dexes just to find the best price, you have to check out PARASWAP. So head on over to paraswap.io/blockcrunch. Yeah, I do remember when I first, discovered crypto. I think back in 2017, I was forwarded a lot of those messages, and I would just like blindly follow them.
Oh, I know. You used to be like super hyped. You'd be like, "Oh my goodness, I'm ready. We're all gonna win." And then the token just goes down when you see the red candle, and you're like, "Oh."
Yeah, I think it took me like a week or two to realize that, okay, this is probably not the best idea. So I just stopped following those. And I'm sure a lot of people, and I know that a lot of people value your work deeply, especially when it comes to warning projects of, funds that may not act in the project's best interest, and also warning retail investors off of potentially opportunistic type of, alleged pump and dumpers. But I don't think, I think the biggest, most impactful one is probably this SiFu Wonderland situation, because that has actually gone to Bloomberg, where mainstream investors who don't even pay attention to DeFi learned about this whole thing. So I definitely want to spend some time on that. But before I dive into that, what exactly happened there? And just to give us a recap there.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give like more of a timeline of Wonderland. So back in September, it was launched. I think it was like first week of September. After that, early October, I kind of posted like a thread with like more of analysis on the launch, and kind of with that, there was like a secret seed LP because the whole thing with like Frog Nation, it was like F the VCs, we're all on our own, like it's for the people. It's kind of like populism narrative for Danny and kind of like everyone he founded it with. But kind of with that, I kind of uncovered there was a seed LP of his friends, and it wasn't really saved kind of in the docs. They're like documents anywhere. So that was kind of like what kind of kickstarted my interest into like Frog Nation and then kind of Wonderland as well. But as far as timing goes, I believe from my talks with Danny, him and SiFu kind of met back in early summer of last year, I think June around the timing. And this was because I think SiFu DM'd Danny about Spell, and they had some, I guess, insightful conversations, and SiFu kind of made some suggestions on like what they should do. Kind of what I've seen on Twitter, at least with like Darren and Alex from Manson. It seems like Dan's kind of given a bunch of like product recommendations there, but it seemed to kind of be like that. But anyhow, Danny, I guess, wanted, and SiFu eventually just decided to start their own protocol. So then that's how Wonderland became, and kind of like even since then, like since the launch, like there's been a bunch of like kind of FUD going around on Twitter, like it's never kind of been like the most like transparent protocol. Like I mean, one of the things that really like catches everyone's eyes, it'd be like you'd see on Twitter, it would be like XYZ is happening with these funds. Did this all go to Danny's wallet? Does this all go to SiFu's wallet? Are they using some strategy to cash out? Like, I think like after looking at that, I never really like saw any proof like that they actually did that. But what they did do, however, is mix personal wallets with like the treasury wallets, and that's kind of like not really the best practice there, just because like you can't really verify if they did indeed cash out or if they were just truly like using it for the treasury. But they would conduct a lot of the transactions from SiFu's public ENS, and he would also receive his payments to this address. So it's kind of like not the best practice at all. And that kind of like, I don't think everyone really knew that. So a lot of times they'd be like, I'm trying to think, I think it was around the CVX OTC deal they did back in November. There was some FUD, and I think SiFu like bought a bunch, and they like said that he was like cashing out around that time. And then like in reality, he was just buying it for Wonderland. But at the time, like no one would really know that because that wasn't made known that he was like conducting transactions from that. So essentially, like Wonderland was just kind of using like I guess he was a treasurer, but they were like using it as like their personal VC fund. And then come around this past winter in January, this is really when received a tip from an anonymous person. So keep all that private just for the best interests of, I don't want to reveal my sources. I keep that integrity. But they kind of reached out and they were like, hey, blah, blah, blah is this person. And like at first I was like, there's no way, because just seems very unlikely. Like it's no one's really heard of this person in a long period of time. It's Michael Patron from, of course, Quadriga. It's kind of like something you don't really hear about as much anymore, because it's been a number of years since that actually happened. The name, of course, you got the Netflix documentary for it coming out soon. So there's a bunch of like hype, I guess, in the mainstream media around it. But kind of with that, they told me he was XYZ and he was running the treasury. So after that, I kind of did some digging. At least publicly on Twitter and stuff, there was no really ties, but on chain at least, he did have some ties on his ENS to Quadriga. But granted, at the time, they were the Ethereum price back then was very small. So even though it was like a couple thousand ETH, back then it was probably only like $50,000. So it's like, I guess you could say it wasn't really like a huge red flag. But anyhow, Danny and I had kind of established at least a line of communication between the two, just because of the fact in the past, like I'd posted about it, and I guess he wanted to be there first if I had any questions. So I kind of reached out to him, and I was like, hey, I wanted to ask, I asked a few things about SiFu. Don't really want to reveal our conversation, but after that, he was like, first kind of hesitated, and eventually after said that he was indeed, and he thought SiFu had changed after all this time, and he was like basically just kind of backing him. And then after that was when I decided I kind of wanted to wait at first, at least. Before I messaged Danny, I was kind of just like thinking the best strategy to actually like release this information, because I didn't want to release it at least without having some harder evidence. But thankfully, Danny was honest about it and came forward. And I guess after that, that was kind of when like all hell kind of broke loose on Twitter. But with that, that was kind of it. Went to like everyone was like going freaking out about it, and particularly Frog Nation people. And soon after, the proposal was kind of put up to remove SiFu from the treasury, and I think 87% voted in favor of yes, and he kind of stepped down after that. And they also put up a proposal to kind of unwind Wonderland as well. And with that, that proposal was pretty dead even, and it ended up failing. But it was very divided there. It seemed there was a lot of Frog Nation holders, at least, that were very, I guess, like they didn't want to like believe it was like the end of Wonderland, and they kind of wanted the 14,000 APR to continue. And I guess some of them maybe didn't have the best understanding of what actually was happening at the time with like some of their practices of just kind of mixing personal wallets and not being the most transparent at times.
Yeah, that's such a crazy story. And just to make sure that we got all the parts right, so essentially there is this guy called Michael Patron, and he ran this identity fraud ring, and I think he actually spent federal prison time for that after he was convicted. And then after that, he started the Canadian exchange called Quadriga, in which one of the co-founders actually died, and I think in excess of like $190 million worth of users' money was locked up, or something along those lines, if I remember correctly. And then after that, somehow he ended up working on this Wonderland project with Danny, the developer we were talking about. And then he was basically the guy made in charge of the entire treasury, which I think at the time that your expose came out was worth, at least on paper, about $700 million. And did they end up kind of embezzling the money there, or did you kind of prevent that from happening?
So I guess like with my thread, it was more like a thing of like worst case, we don't know like his best intentions. Like, why would you keep this hidden? I feel like as an investor, you want to know who, if like a convicted like felon and someone with that history was running your project and managing like the treasury, and the fact they were using like the their EOA wallet at times to conduct like transactions on behalf of the treasury. It's a bit irresponsible, I guess you could say. So I guess I kind of want to just bring that to light so people like could make the best decision and kind of go from there.
And after you uncovered the identity of one of the anonymous co-founder, which happened to be Michael Patron, he was then forced off there was a vote put into place to kick him off the team. And then after that, this incident basically settled, right? Is that pretty much how it ended up?
Yes, correct. And then kind of since then, I guess there hasn't been actually too much activity, at least on Twitter, from Danny's end and then Wonderland. I think they ended up like trying to like make peace, I guess, with the community by doing like an airdrop, I think, for one of the projects they invested in, BetSwap. But I think they got even more pushback because like funny enough, the airdrop, like there's holders that I guess had a significant amount of time, and that's like Wonderland's, I guess, ticker, you could say. And they only got like $3 worth of airdrop, and they ended up giving it like the same amount to everyone.
Yeah, and it's interesting that and how high profile a case this was, and even the market reaction to, I think, when your first tweet threat was pretty severe, right? And a lot of the projects associated with Danny were immediately trading down like 30%. So naturally, I think a lot of retail investors or back holders are quite mad at the situation, and I see a lot of replies on your Twitter threads that get pretty nasty and pretty hostile. So how do you deal with that? And do you I guess, number one, do you feel like before you post, kind of how do you judge the potential impact that your threats might have on investors? And number two, how do you deal with potentially hostile feedback from some of these guys?
Yeah. So I guess like when I approach it, I do ask some people, but I guess it's more of like on a need to know basis. If I think they might be relevant to whatever case, I kind of take in their input before I release it. I'm not like just going around blatantly like asking as many people like, "Hey, what should I do?" I'm not asking my best friend. I'm going around to people I think that could maybe help me make a better decision, an informed decision before I actually release something. And kind of what that goes with the hate. It's more just like developing thick skin. I mean, if you've been on the internet for a while, there's just like nasty people all around. So I mean, you just kind of have to ignore it at times. And I think that some of the best responses, like I guess, don't like feed into it as much. Um, you don't really want to like fuel them, I guess you could say. And I guess that sometimes you slip up and you maybe say something you shouldn't back to them, but at times I think it's just the best to just ignore them, and maybe some of the followers that you've had for a while will respond and at least stick up for you.
And do you ever hesitate with posting some stuff, or kind of what's your decision process behind, hey, I'm going to post this even though the impact might be big? Like, do you feel that you have a responsibility to investors out there, or is it the case where, everybody can find this information, right? It's out on the chain. So, technically people should be doing their own due diligence before they invest in stuff.
Yes, I would say a lot of the time it's the case where I think a lot of it's already out there, but people haven't really dug into it. I'd just say like the average market participant is maybe not the most diligent, so they will just buy based off what people say. So that just is an issue in itself. So unless someone's blatantly saying it, they won't actually like realize. I think that goes kind of back to what we've seen kind of looks rare, like the tokenomics at the start weren't very sustainable, at least with like just how high of APR they were giving out. They gave out a bunch of the supply in airdrops, and then like it was very detailed in the docs at launch, and they even like gave all the different like contracts and wallets. They had them all labeled. It was very detailed relative to some of the other projects, but they did not disclose, I guess, some of the early investors. But going back to like the tokenomics, it was all out there and blatantly there. But like here comes a few weeks later, and people are enraged and mad on Twitter, saying, "How could this happen?" and stuff like that, when it was all really there in the start. So it seems like a lot of these people just have to be told what actually is there. And then at the same time, whenever that's not the case, I think like the whole thing I'm all about is there being some level of transparency. Like, um, there's clearly not enough in the industry, and it's like something that needs to change because people should be able to make their own decision. But when like certain facts are kept hidden, this can like really like mislead them.
Yeah, because if I were to put myself in your shoes, on one hand, most of the stuff you cover, if not all of it, is already public on chain out there for people to see. None of this is like proprietary private information. So on one hand, I feel like if I were you, I wouldn't have the responsibility to investors out there to like warn every single one of them before I put out a threat, nor is it possible. And on
Yeah.
the other hand, you do have a considerable following, so I'm kind of struggling to think about, okay, should I be thinking about the people that these threats might affect? But then at the same time, it is a free market, and I feel like people have a responsibility for their own investments and holdings. So that's something that I find like really interesting to think about, as someone in your shoes, and it was really interesting to hear your viewpoint on that as well. And I guess on that point, have you ever released a threat that afterwards you realize was wrong, or has so far everything pretty much been spot on?
Yeah. So I think everything so far has been, I guess, spot on. I guess my whole thing is everything's, I guess you could say, I try to stick to the facts as much as possible, but it's still
Mhm.
stuff that I feel is important. So I guess if you don't, there's people that don't agree with threads, and that's definitely been the case before. But I guess like everything at the end of the day, it's still like my Twitter, and it's what I feel is important. So I think it's just inevitable, of course, that there will be people that don't agree. And when some of these people are more popular, in the space, and whether being an influencer, a reputable project, or VC, like there's going to be, of course, more people angry, especially if it's like people's bags. When you like post about something that a lot of people hold, like that's kind of when also people get mad. Like I posted about Treasure DAO this week, and there was a lot of holders mad when like the thing I posted about was completely unrelated to the project. But of course, just because like they worked there or something, people are like they didn't even read the rest of what I wrote. It was just completely about the Treasure DAO.
Yeah, I think when it comes to crypto, people are always very married to their holdings. I guess anything with financial stake, people get very emotional over any type of perceived slight against their holdings. So that's totally understandable, and it's really cool to actually um, kind of see it play out in real time. Kind of this anonymous vigilantism, if you call it that. And I guess a few final questions for you is one of the people on Twitter had a question for you in terms of with the future of on-chain monitoring, which is given that there is a lot of rapid advancement and deployment of zero-knowledge proofs now, and a lot more development in privacy-preserving technologies, do you foresee that your work as someone who is trying to uncover a paper trail of transactions for potentially questionable characters, will that get harder? And if so, how do we make sure we can still protect ourselves when everything becomes private?
So I think the same thing is like there just needs to you need to do decent due diligence when you just like whenever you buy something, and I think the space in general just needs to be very clear with like what we need to see. I think the majority of projects do a great job of like putting everything out there that so an investor can make an informed decision. But I guess for some of the projects that just won't be possible, and I think the thing is just to avoid those projects when you can, and of course, like what you said, as every the industry advances and privacy does increase, I think the thing is like even then, a lot of stuff is still out there, whether them posting about it in the past or it being they use a centralized entity like. Um, You'd be surprised. So I actually just looked at like the wormhole exploits, and I kind of shared my findings with the team. So I essentially went through all the morning deposits into Tornado Cash, and because of the fact, like I think Tornado is very interesting, just with like the exact process and what people use it and everything there. So I didn't really like. I wasn't sure if I'd actually find anything, and I still don't think I really did. So essentially what I did is just kind of classified all the different transaction inputs I found. There's like a couple thousand, and I essentially just manually went into all the addresses and like and then like kind of like flagged each one depending on like what the risk associated with it I felt was. And kind of with that, I think it comes back to a lot of these people are not advised, but they use centralized entities still. So at the end of the day, if someone really wants to find out who you are, as long as you're using a centralized entity, there'll be a way for them to do that.
And this is a question for myself. I don't know if you're familiar with Muddy Waters Research, but there's this kind of privately held investment management firm. I think they're like less than 10 people, I want to say. And they basically specialize in uncovering like accounting fraud or financial fraud at different companies. And they also manage activist positions. So they basically short companies that they think are scams or have, unsavory practices, and then they publish this research on it. Is this something that you've considered before, like starting maybe an activist short selling fund?
I mean, like I probably should if I was smart, just because of the fact it hasn't been very financially rewarding. Besides putting up like a tip address the other week, so I mean, I definitely could have profited a ton from Wonderland as well as Magic as well if I had actually like if that had been my intentions. But like going into it, that had never really been something important to me from the start. And I think if I did do that, that would be a clear cut path to being public enemy number one. um, so I think I don't think I could really handle that, at least in my like personal life outside crypto. And I feel like people would place an even larger target on my back.
That makes sense. I do remember there were few examples of activists short selling funds, and they got completely blown up just just by the sheer ferocity of the crypto Twitter community. And I guess the last question here is, do you have any teasers for us? And it's okay if you don't. Any teasers or leaks on potentially upcoming exposés that you're working on?
So I guess the one thing is hopefully I'll be able to kind of share my analysis I did on the wormhole exploit too. They don't want to like release anything just in case I've found something from it. But I did flag. I basically rated 125 all the deposits into Tornado, and I kind of found some interesting things that way. But of course, there's so many deposits, and we don't know how cautious that person was when they exploited wormhole. So I don't know if there's going to be anything there, but I guess I hope to be able to share like that so people can like kind of see what goes on in Tornado. Like it's really interesting. I'd say like the primary users are just like your average like shitcoiners, people that start meme coins, that are honeypots and scams. They'll run a couple of those, cash out, send it through Tornado. And then you also have, surprisingly, this one surprised me, but there's a lot of these NFT projects. I'd say it was a quarter was these shitcoiners, and then the other quarter was just a lot of these NFT projects where like they would essentially just funnel the funds through a bunch of contracts and end up in a wallet, and then they would send it through Tornado. And it was for a lot of these like low effort 3D copycat NFT projects, and not really like some of the more quality ones. But it was just kind of interesting to see how like evident this was, because I didn't really realize that was happening as much before. And then of course, I guess there's just the people where like they send like they create a fresh address, they send 1 ETH from Binance or whatever, and then they'll send it straight to Tornado. I don't really understand what's the point of that, because it seems like Binance or another exchange would ban you for that, but doesn't really seem to be the case. And I guess like my other teaser was, I hinted at this one on Twitter some, but Maki Big Brother. That's kind of like the big one I've been researching some, just because he's been a part of so many different projects, and there's kind of a history there. I don't want to make like any like assumptions before I finish everything, but that's just kind of the one I've been working on.
Got it. Yeah, appreciate the teaser there. And Zach, on this show we've interviewed anyone from billionaires like SBF to an actual rock star. But I gotta say, this is one of the more interesting ones that I'm sure will get a lot of people talking as well. So thank you so much for coming on. And if for people who want to reach out to you, maybe to give you maybe hints or tips about things that they're noticing, or just to reach out to you, what are the best channels for them to do this?
Yeah, I'm always very active on Twitter. Of course, if you send a message to me, it's always best to be straight to the point. If you're like a new account, I mean, if we have mutuals, I'll probably see it and respond. But if you're a fresh account, it's always good whenever you DM someone that you just be straight to the point with what you want. I guess like whenever people do reach out, like it's always good to, but whenever you're receiving like 100 plus DMs a day, it's not really that I like purposely ignore people. It's really just because of the fact I can't humanly respond to that many people a day. So if you're straight to the point, then like I can respond and get back to you fast.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on.